Good afternoon, everyone.
Speaker's on. I'm like,
Hope you got a snack. Hope you had a little afternoon caffeine and sugar. And I'm very happy to be able to introduce to you today the Let's Talk Insurance, or Let's Talk Licensing and Insurance Roundtable discussion with three representatives of industry, all of whom are either current or former members of the NIPR Board of Directors. Today, we're going to talk about the learning objectives. We're going to focus on current and state trends, historical influences in producer licensing, evaluation and improvement, PLMA and uniformity, enhancing license, death by 1,000 cuts. Collaboration with legislators, which is always fun, and legislative success stories, so those two go hand in hand, and significant proposals for improvement and change. And so before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our three board members, our three panelists. Many of you, if any of you have been around for a while, you know these folks. Wes Bissett, who is sitting at the far end, is the president of the Belmore Group, LLC, a public policy consulting, government relations, and regulatory compliance firm. The firm provides insurance and financial services clients with assistance on a broad array of issues in Washington, D.C., state capitals around the nation, and other national forums. Wes, before establishing Belmore, he was an employee of the Insurance Agents and Brokers of America, IIAB, or the Big I, and one of the nation's largest agent, or definitely the nation's largest agent trade organization. During his tenure, he served as Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and State Relations and advanced the legislative and regulatory interests of IIABA's members before state legislators, insurance regulators, and other bodies. Bissett continues to serve the Big I as its senior counsel of government affairs and develops legislation, provides technical expertise, and offers political assistance to efforts that enhance the independent agency system. He also sits on various industry-related committees and boards, most importantly, the National Insurance Producer Registry. Wes served as a legislative assistant for former U.S. Representative Robert L. Ehrlich, Republican from Maryland, and graduated with honors from both Wake Forest University and George Washington University Law School. Thank you, Wes, for being here. Kate Jensen, I think you can tell which one she is a partner at Steptoe LLP Government Affairs and Public Policy Group based in DC. Her practice focuses on legislative and regulatory counseling at the federal and state levels for insurance brokers, carriers, and insurtech providers. Jensen and her team at Steptoe advise clients on insurance compliance issues, legislative strategy, and business risk. Prior to rejoining Steptoe in 2024, Jensen served as corporate counsel at Amazon Web Services, where she led global policy initiatives for AWS's infrastructure regulatory compliance team on environment, products, and trade topics in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific region. Jensen clerked for the Honorable Richard W. Story on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. And before law school, she was a federal lobbyist for a bipartisan DC-based firm, and she worked for a leadership office on Capitol Hill. Jensen holds a JD from the University of Georgia School of Law, an MA in government from Johns Hopkins University, and a BA from the University of Virginia in government and foreign affairs and economics. Outside of work, Kate enjoys rowing, mountaineering, and the amazing outdoor playground that is the Pacific Northwest where she lives, and she used to live on a houseboat, which I think is the coolest fact about her. Last but certainly not least is John Fielding. He is a seasoned professional with nearly 30 years of experience in the insurance sector, specializing in insurance regulation. Should I not mention how long? I heard it go, oh. Specializing in insurance regulation, public policy advocacy, and government affairs consulting on both state and federal insurance regulatory matters. He's recognized as a national expert, especially on pet insurance. Fielding advises on a broad spectrum of insurance issues relative to federal policymakers, state legislatures, and regulators. He collaborates closely with regulators and legislators nationwide, helping clients build and strengthen relationships with public policymakers. Fielding is actively involved with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, NIPR, and the National Council of Insurance Legislators and COIL, where he has long-standing record of advancing legislative, regulatory, and policy interests for his clients. Currently, John is principal of Fielding Strategies, LLC. His previous roles include serving as federal counsel for the NAIC, representing insurance industry clients at major Washington, D.C. law firms, and acting as general counsel, global government and industry affairs at Chubb. Thank you to all three of you for being here, and let's get started with the first question. Wes, we'll start with you. How do you view the current state of producer licensing compliance in 2025, and what emerging trends do you believe will shape its future?
Well, good question. I think, well, we've come a long way. I mean, you asked about 25 years ago, and I think that's the right point to ask about, because it was 25 years ago that the Producer Licensing Model Act was adopted. So if you look at where we were right before the adoption of the PLMA compared to today, there's been a lot of progress made, especially as it relates to license acquisition. How do you get a license? How easy is it to do that? How easy is it to do that in multiple states? We now have a common statutory framework in most states. We have what I'll call a quasi-reciprocal framework in most states. We're pretty reciprocally a little bit, like not maybe totally reciprocal. And we've also seen NIPR make a lot of advances that, the types of reporting requirements and the acquisition process for licensing, and in other ways, and I think NIPR has also added to the streamlining of the licensing process. And so there's like significant improvements. It's night and day compared to where we were 25 years ago. But I would say, are we where we really ought to be? If we look at it compared to other industries, if we contemplate and consider the fact we're in 2025 and consider where we are in terms of technology, are we really where we need to be? It seems like when it comes to the maintenance of a license, the requirements that you have to comply with to keep your license in your home state and other states, it seems like we've lost some of that steam that was behind the uniformity effort. And I know we'll talk more about that throughout this session. I think the costs of obtaining and maintaining compliance with licensing have become more and more of an issue. Agents operate in more and more states than we would have probably contemplated 25 years ago, and that's a big reason for those increased costs. In terms of what might be coming down the pike, I mean, we've heard a lot about that this morning. AI. What does AI mean? How does AI intersect with the licensing framework we have today? I don't know, but we need to start thinking about it and contemplating it and deciding whether the framework we have today makes sense and is fair to everyone going forward with all the changes that are coming down the pike.
Thanks, Wes. Kate, what are some unforeseen factors from 25 years ago that are now influencing the licensing and compliance landscape? And how do you think we can adapt to those on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think, obviously, and especially post-pandemic, right, we have a very mobile workforce, and we are placing insurance in a way that looks really different from 25 years ago, right? As Wes mentioned, a lot of producers are operating in almost all states, right? It is not uncommon for some of the folks with my clients to have dozens of licenses at any one time. And I think that that's not how the framework was originally constructed, right? Your home state was really your home base. Maybe you had one or two sort of neighboring non-resident licenses, but this is increasingly becoming a nationwide business. So I think that that's something that makes the reciprocity challenges and the little paper cuts that much more pronounced, because if you're dealing with challenges in 2 or 3 states, that's one thing. If you're dealing with the same sort of variations on the same themes of challenges across 50 states, that is a huge deal all of a sudden. I also think that we have a generational issue, right, with the industry. This is not a business, and I cannot believe it, where young college kids are setting out to like be insurance producers, right? Or, be regulators or whatever it is. And I think, we have to find a way for this business to stay relevant and to stay appealing for the next generation to attract a really talented, high quality industry, but also folks on the regulatory side. And that's going to involve a lot of technology, a lot of innovation. So hopefully we'll be up to that challenge.
Good. So, John, based on your decades of experience in the industry, how would you grade the current state of producer licensing and compliance? I mean, you were at the NAIC. I mean, so you saw this, firsthand when we were really working to address some of the existential challenges around the state system. And, what improvements would you suggest at this point?
So, yeah, Lori and I go way back to the beginning. So the changes have been dramatic in the, is it 30 years since NIPR was created?
Almost 30 years.
Yeah. And the changes have been dramatic. It used to be different sizes, different colored paper, different sized fonts, different sizes of paper. So it was pretty insane. So it is a lot better. But I think the things that Kate and Wes just pointed out sort of indicate that there are still significant, I guess I'd say hindrances. It's not, it's possible we're doing it, right? And you guys are doing it, the regulators are doing it, NIPR is doing it, and the industry is all complying. But it doesn't need to be this much friction. So I guess in terms of grading, you asked about grading, right?
Yes. And grade on a curve. Please.
Yeah, grade on a curve. I mean, I think, given where we started and where we are now, I mean, I hope I, get a gentleman's C for the regulators. But what I would say is, I think that it's the state's interaction with NIPR and NIPR's ability to sort of smooth over, maybe not all the bumps and all the friction, but a lot of the friction that really brings it up, to the B grade, to the passing grade, to the ability to really comply and get through. And that's good. I mean, it's great, right? But it's kind of unnecessary. Like, we should be beyond that now, I think. I think that, we have the technology, There's a lot that I think can be done to get rid of a lot of the friction that's in there right now. Part of it is just, it's hard work, and it takes a lot of time and thought from you guys, from the regulators, from NIPR, from industry players. It just takes a lot of hard work. It also is a little bit scary, because I think you're going to ask about, I think there was something about opening up the PLMA. No one wants to open up the PLMA. It's been a closed model act for like 25 years. I think there was maybe one amendment to it, right, Wes? Because of the fear of opening up the model. But, I think we have to, move forward and, sort of just say, hey, there are things that we might want to address here for flexibility purposes, because it's not just on the regulatory side that we're talking about, like AI and technology and the use of technology, but in the distribution channel side too, there's a lot of changes. And it's not just that producers are participating or selling in more states, it's the way things are sold. So I represent, some small limited lines that some of you guys might not like so much, but I do. And they distribute online a lot. There's a lot of, who is the agent, and how is it done, and who should be licensed? And maybe we really need to think of who should be licensed. I mean, we know people are licensed properly, and it's done according to the law right now. But what's the best way to do it? Is this the best way? Are these the really? Are we doing what's necessary and only what's necessary? But are we doing enough to protect consumers? And I don't know all the answers to that. But I think there's a lot of thought that can be put into how to make things work better and more frictionless. And I think that should be the goal.
Yeah, so we've been talking over the last few years about, and we've talked in this forum about this issue of regulatory backsliding. And you know, Wes, you kind of made a reference to that. And so we are we're at almost 30 years now into this experiment. And I'd like to ask all three of you to comment about, you know, are you in the spaces where you're working seeing less commitment to uniformity and compliance with the PLMA, and what are you seeing as the implications for your your members? And Kate, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so, you know, as I mentioned, I represent the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, and their members are the larger brokerage firms, typically working across all 50 states, commercial lines, and we get a lot of questions from our members. What is the requirement in X state, you know, related to licensing or, you know, licensing for this line of insurance? And ideally, right, if we were in a truly uniform state, that would be the easiest question to answer, right? It would be like, the rule is, if you're selling, soliciting, negotiating, you need a producer license. I recently had occasion to do a 50-state survey of y'all's insurance producer licensing laws. I know you're jealous. And let me tell you guys, it's all over the place. It really is. And the thing is that there's a lot of sort of baseline uniformity around the Producer Licensing Model Act trigger, right? The sell, solicit, negotiate. And then there's a lot of just, frankly, legacy crap in there, like just text from back in the day that never got cleaned up, extra definitions, extra lists of activities that would trigger a producer license requirement. And my clients are like, you've got to be kidding me. We have not solved this yet. And so I think there's a little bit of a problem that, you know, maybe we assumed that we had gotten to a point of uniformity that we never actually quite got to. And I'm not blaming you guys, that's on the legislators. These laws are a disaster. But in terms of the commitment that you asked about, Karen, my view is that it's hard to get anyone's attention on these issues, right? It's not the sexiest stuff. And so, you know, there are a lot of huge insurance-related priorities out there, right? The catastrophic risk, stabilizing some of the P&C markets. I mean, big stuff that policymakers are trying to tackle. So I just feel like this is getting lost in the noise and in the shuffle, and we're not seeing any drive to sort of improve that status quo.
Wes, do you think that's similar for your membership?
Yeah, no, I think it's the same. You know, what John said something earlier about we have the technology. It kind of made me think, for those of you who are older in the room, remember the beginning of the Bionic Man? The theme, it was like, we have the technology. We can build him stronger. Like, that's kind of where we are. Like, there are things we can do to build back stronger. And we probably can and should. I mean, things are unnecessarily complex. Things are unnecessarily different state to state. I mean, it's amazing. I'll give you two things to think about as you try to put it in context. There are lots of vendors out there whose what they sell, essentially the product that they are selling is to help people get and maintain their insurance licenses. Things should be no offense to the vendors in the room, I'm sure you're shooting darts at me right now, but it should not be so complex that there is a wealth of vendors out in this market helping people comply with what should be a fairly easy to comply with regulatory process. The other thing I'd urge you to maybe consider is what Kate just said she went through with her state-by-state analysis. I can't imagine like the charts and, you know, Excel sheets and all that. I mean, Sila, who does the same thing, I think they have like 90 charts now analyzing the differences on certain like similar issues. How do states handle change of resident license? There's multi-page chart for that. How do states handle DRLPs? There's even though it's a 2-line provision in that PLMA, there's 6, 7 pages explaining the various differences and permutations on that. So there's obviously things we can and should do. To give another sort of kind of evidence of how things have stalled, in the early days, Lori will remember wherever she is out here, in the early days post-PLMA, there was an effort at the NEIC to develop uniform standards and to have a list of FAQs, frequently asked questions and answers. And these both sort of offered interpretations of the PLMA, but also kind of provided some basic guidance for states as they were thinking about issues emerging from the PLMA. I think the last time the NEIC adopted a uniform standard was in 2012. I mean, it's a long time ago. There have been a lot of questions that could have been addressed in the 13 years since then. Lots of FAQs that could be addressed. So, to me, the question about whether to open up the PLMA is kind of one of form over substance. The PLMA, model laws, uniform standards, FAQs, those are all recommendations from the NEIC to the states. I mean, if you wanted to open up the PLMA, great. If you wanted to do it via uniform standards, great. But I do think it's time on some of what may be conceivably viewed as low-hanging fruit to address those issues and really encourage states again to get behind something. A great example of that would be like a change in resident state. That should be instantaneous in 50 states. We should not need a multi-page silent chart to help us through that process.
Yeah, I don't want to call anybody out, but I had lunch with a regulator yesterday who's a former producer. And she told me what it took to cancel her licenses. She held a lot of licenses in a lot of states, and she had this very extensive spreadsheet. And it took her, I think she said 45 days before she was able to, and she became a regulator. These are real, these are real issues. John, yes, absolutely, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing to what these guys just said on the uniformity thing, and just to Kate's original point that maybe we weren't so uniform as we thought we were all along, and that is, for example, and I'll go into pet insurance for a minute. So under the uniform licensing standards, a pet insurance producer a state can either require a full-line P&C license or have a limited line, and you're uniform. That's not uniform. That's two different standards, but that's in the uniformity standards. So that's sort of a really easy one to sort of take a look at and say, okay, maybe uniformity isn't exactly uniform. And so we need to really go in and think about how to do that and what we should do. And even the P&C states aren't uniform because there's different sublines, or there's personal lines in some states, and it's property in some states and casualty in some states. So it can be really, it just needs a good look at. That's all. Just needs a good look at.
Yeah, so we talked about the PLMA, and given the reluctance there to open a model law, and for those of you who may be sort of newer, I mean, sort of help you understand, model laws are big deals. They're hard to get past. Think about 56 different jurisdictions agreeing on something. It's really challenging. And so to take the lid off of that again, and let's have a whole discussion about that, then it's the myth, the Greek myth of Pandora's box there. So let's assume that we're going to keep Pandora in the box there. What else? What are the additional methods would the industry like to see to implement to improve licensing? And Wes, you've talked about this a bit. You talked about the standards and FAQs. I mean, Kate, are there other things that you can think about that would improve the process?
Karen, you asked about substantive outcomes or how to go about doing it.
How to go about doing it?
Yeah, no, I think there are some low-hanging fruit issues, and I think you just say, all right, we're going to tackle 2 or 3 of these this year for the NEAC, and you can do it through uniform standards or FAQs. Look, I don't think you can wait until 56 states or jurisdictions agree like worry about the critical mass, start moving in the right direction. Even a model law, when a model law is adopted, there's no guarantee. In most cases, all the states aren't going to adopt it anyway. So we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And so if there's concern with opening up the PLMA, and I understand the reasons why it's a little tougher lift, you can make recommendations that carry the weight of the NEAC by opening up and considering uniform standards or FAQs that are guidance. But the only caution I'd make with doing that is sometimes there is a desire, for whatever reason, in the licensing area we see this, to try to get all 56 states in alignment. I'm not even sure that should be the goal, because if you're going to do that, it's going to be the most onerous, restrictive form of a regulatory requirement that is conceivable, right? If that's going to be what it's take, we need a little bit of give and take. Maybe you try to get that critical mass and not worry about the small number of outliers that might be out there on a particular issue. I think the goal should be what's reasonable, but also what's efficient. And I think we need to start to apply some degree of a cost-benefit analysis to what we do. Anything could be required, but at a certain point, is it really, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like requiring, something onerous, is it really protecting consumers at the end of the day? Maybe we'll talk about the dual layers of licensure that still exist today. We have about 3 or 4. Do we really need all those in the way they are today? I would argue not.
Right. Kate, you want to add to that?
So, given the sort of legislative and statutory constraints that you all have, I do think that there are things that regulators can do to address, without statutory authority, I like the way that John put it, some of those process frictions that really, from an industry perspective, can make this process freaking unbearable, right? Getting licensed and staying licensed. And I think things like, aligning on best practices for timing, like timelines alone, right? So deadlines for certain things to happen, whether that's renewals, notifications that have to be provided to the departments on whatever topic, any kind of standardization we can move toward for the process of getting these things done would be tremendously helpful, and that's not a statutory thing. There's also, I think, a lot of opportunity for regulators to learn from each other, because there is some great innovation going on, I think, in some of the departments around licensing, wanting to make things more efficient. I don't know how many of you guys were attending the NAIC like 10 years ago, but it used to be that you couldn't go 3 sentences without hearing the phrase regulatory sandbox. Do you guys remember that? It was like such a trend. But the point, though, of a lot of those discussions that were being had was, get the regulators together and start thinking a little bit out of the box and being creative and innovating, right? I don't know what happened to that. Apparently we're anti-innovation now. But for instance, our members flagged as one opportunity here, you've got a handful of states, Florida included, that have the perpetual licenses, right? So you don't have to go through the renewal process every year at a, pick your random timeline that any individual state is on. Instead, you do have your obligations to keep your continuing education up to speed. You have that constant oversight from the regulator, but they've eliminated that line item that has to be done for a couple of states every year. Stuff like that is tremendously helpful, and hearing about the experience of those states and how that has probably A, made their lives freaking better, and B, made industry like them more, that could be helpful information for other departments to have. So I think, getting in that habit of finding ways to streamline, simplify, unify on the processes, and then sharing that information with each other would be tremendously helpful from our perspective.
John, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
I agree with everything they've said. And I think maybe a way to do it, and this wasn't my idea, but a little bird gave this one to me. The NIC has an accreditation program, right? I mean, maybe there's a way, and you guys used to do dashboards. I don't know if NAPR still does the dashboards, which are really good, I think, to sort of tell each state where they are. And to Kate's point, maybe they can learn from the other states by seeing where, North Dakota is. Maybe South Dakota can do a little better. Just kidding.
Boy.
I'm just kidding. But Commissioner Gottfried is the president of the NIC, and he's taller than you. But anyway, I do think that that can be helpful, right? They can see where the states can see where one another are, and on the process issues too. And so maybe there is some of that low-hanging fruit that maybe can be moved along because the states do see where one another are, and maybe they can come. Maybe you guys can come to agreement. And I know there have been changes on some of the date of birth things for renewals and things like that over the years, and maybe that's just something to revisit and re-up. But in terms of getting that done, maybe sharing information among the states through the dashboards, or, and I don't know if accreditation is even possible in this, but or something like that, where you really sort of push, I guess, a little bit the states to get there.
We know, and IPR knows, in working with states when either we're doing an implementation or just meeting with them to go over their business rules, they are often constrained by legislation, and anybody who has worked with any kind of legislature, particularly a state legislature, it's not a walk in the park. These are challenging technical issues that people don't really understand. So how do you see regulators and industry collaborating with legislators to update or improve the regulatory environment, given that producer licensing and compliance requirements are often and with a lot of specificity, like timelines, captured in statutes and regs? And Kate, you want to talk about that?
I'll take a crack at this one. So look, in my experience, we get the best product out of legislatures when the departments are involved, right? I mean, generally speaking, and for many of your states, the legislature is not just a part-time job, it's like a 2-week job out of the year, right? And so these folks are not experts in this space like you are, industry folks, regulators, and they get a lot of creative ideas like from their neighbors about what might be a good idea for a new insurance policy. And without sort of a baseline relationship and sort of an educational dynamic between the people with the insurance expertise and those who are writing the laws, we end up with some really wacky ideas out there, right? And then that's when industry has to run around just like trying to defeat everything. And that's not a fun position to be in. So I think one, just making sure that that connection is made and being made regularly with your state insurance committees especially would go a long way toward nipping bad ideas in the bud early, if that makes sense. You guys don't want to have to be dealing with bad laws either, right? Then consumers and industry call and yell at you guys. It's a great deal for the legislators. But the other thing, I will say is, I wish that we would have, like, how some communities have like park cleanup day and the whole community comes out and you like clean up the weeds and you pick up the trash and all that and it looks so beautiful and clean. I want to have that for insurance statutes, right? Like I want everyone, and I want the regulators to take the lead on this, to have a freaking cleanup day for their insurance codes. And I want somebody to come up with an omnibus package, right? That says, these are the things that are making us crazy and keeping us from innovating and streamlining and making anything easy because it's written in the law and we need you to tweak these things, right? Somebody to go through that process and then push for it, right? It's got to be a priority. And if it rides along with a way more important, way more sexy bill, great. But I think that level of sort of attention is what it's going to take to make some of those statutory changes. And I would love to see somebody take on a project like that. Hear all the ways that you need to fix the laws so that we can speaking as a regulator, we can do our jobs better, be more responsive to the current business environment.
Wes, do you think the Big I will provide the lawn and leaf bags for the park cleanup day?
I mean, so it's admittedly tough, right? I mean, so we're, in this, for the 50 minutes today in September, we're focused on agent licensing, talking about it. But I mean, the reality is, like, we'll walk out of this room. I mean, Director Dieter's got to be worrying about what's going on with the hard market. And I mean, he's got a basket of issues in South Dakota that dominate his time, and his counterparts in every state have very pressing issues that are priorities. And the reality is we're kind of talking about the blocking and tackling of insurance regulation, right? It's the redheaded stepchild, if you will, of the insurance regulatory framework. So it's tough to find oxygen for it. I mean, we know that. I'm not even, so it's always helpful to be, to the extent that things need to be done to achieve consistency with the PLMA 25 years ago. If we can do those in department bills, that would be great. I do think, though, there are a lot of things that can be done by process change. I'm going to give you a specific example. Here's what the PLMA says about DRLPs. It is one sentence long. It says the business entity, this is in order to get a business entity license in the application, insurance commissioner shall find that the BE has designated a licensed producer responsible for the business entity's compliance with the laws, rules, and regs of a state. It doesn't say you got to have a DRLP for every line of insurance that agency might sell. It doesn't say you need to charge a fee for that. It doesn't say there needs to be a DRLP for every branch location. There are a lot of things. If we came up with a standard that we all sort of agreed on, there's probably a lot that could be done from a process, rule, reg perspective on that issue. And I'm just citing one. So I do think there's a little bit of that cleanup that could be done. And then I think we begin to have conversations about some of these other issues. Then I think we could say, can this be done within the existing PLMA framework? If it can, you move forward without a legislative change. If it can't, then maybe we talk about, what model language might look like on that. But I think we almost need to dig in a little bit. I think it's hard to have a broad brush solution for all that's out there. You got to dig in, start identifying those. I think if I could wave my magic wand, I would think in the licensing arena, maybe regulators with industry would say for 2026, we're going to focus on 2 or 3 major things, try to solve those issues, and then figure out a plan of action for how you go about resolving them. I think if you try to solve 20 problems at one time, you end up having bad results. Nobody's focused on any when you're focused on 20.
Right. In the session earlier today, we were talking a bit about occupational licensing and about a move to eliminate required pre-licensing education that exists in many states. And I shared that there are some states that they've had success in making that optional and not required. Are there any other recent legislative efforts that you've seen that have been successful and have sort of moved the ball in the right direction, John?
That's the hardest
If
question.
the answer is no, that's going to be really sad.
Well, it might be. It might be, actually. So let me give you the history of pet insurance. No.
I'm all about that.
Yeah.
You know that.
I will use it as an example, though, because there was a proposal from industry to deal with the pet insurance producer licensing uniformity, really non-uniformity. And the producer licensing working group decided that they wanted to keep it the way it was. So they didn't want to go there. They wanted to allow the current state to stay. And I think that was fine, except that now you're finding other states that want to go in even other different kinds of directions. So it can lead to more sort of diffuse approach by the states, which I think is a real challenge. And I just feel like we have so much that we're trying, like Wes was saying, there are so many issues that we want to get done, that we want to push for. And I think you really need to sort of narrow the focus as much as possible to those few that you can. But I think you need to know what they are first. I don't think we know the universe of issues yet. So we need to do that.
Oh, we know them.
Okay, well, there.
You can ask the members of the customer service team from NIPR. They know them all.
Well, and maybe that's the start then, is to get that, to work through that list and then figure out what are the priorities, though. And I don't know what those priorities are right now.
And Wes mentioned the dashboards before, and that really was, the dashboards came out of this session, one of these sessions at the summit years ago, and I'm looking at Matt Taplin because he was sitting here then, where regulators said, okay, you're talking about all these pain points. What are they? What are they? What are the biggest ones? And let's start chipping away at them. And that's That was how the dashboards were born, is a request, because in fairness to regulators, like, they've got to do their jobs in their states, right? So it's very tough to have that sort of 56 state. Wes?
I've got, so there is, I think, a somewhat recent example of a legislative success in a producer adjacent area, maybe not licensing specifically, and it's somewhat analogous. For a long time, I mean, laws that even go back beyond the PLMA were anti-rebating laws that go back to the Unfair Trade Practices Act in the 40s, 50s, 60s, like decades old. And there was a very rigid regulatory framework that, you know, with innovations we were seeing in the industry, you know, they were colliding with what was spelled out in the anti-rebating statutory frameworks. And there was a debate that occurred. A lot of states have relaxed those to some extent, modernized them. And I think that's been a pretty good success story. Consumers have benefited. Agents have largely benefited. It hasn't become the Wild West. It's not like you can give away anything to a consumer, but I think the regulators thoughtfully came up with ways to modernize those laws, and they've been updated in quite a few states at this point, either through statute or in some places through bulletins and regs.
John?
I think that is a really good point, because rebating was so important, and I think it hit so much of the industry. And there is another one, and it's not pet insurance, but on travel insurance. So I know, another limited line, but this tells you,
Same
like,
church, different
the
pew.
niche lines. What did you say? What did you say?
Nothing.
I'm just going to keep talking louder than you. But I will say that, so the last uniformity standard that was done in 2012 was the travel insurance uniformity standard. And then NCOIL did a model act based on the uniformity standard, the NAIC's uniformity standard. And then no one wanted to implement it. The regulators didn't want to implement it. You didn't want to push it in the states. And so the industry went and pushed it. And it's in 48, 49 states right now. So that was a legislative success, and it was because you guys put the standard together. So the legislators had confidence that it was going to be okay, and then the industry ended up pushing it and getting it enacted across the country, working with the departments, making sure the departments are going to be okay, not going to oppose, that sort of thing. But that is the biggest legislative success that I've seen outside the accreditation program in a long time.
So I want to leave some time for questions, but I would like you all three to weigh in on, your biggest wish. If you could implement one significant change in licensing, what would it be? And why do you think it would make a difference? Kate, you want to? Because I think I know Kate's answer.
Just kidding. For those of you who were here last year, it's the same message. Look, my clients would get rid of appointments and affiliations tomorrow. That is that's a construct that generates a ton of just angst for the large brokerage firms. And even though it's an insurer obligation on the back end, the brokers are running around trying to manage sometimes hundreds of appointments for an individual broker. This is craziness, and in our view, it doesn't serve any public policy function anymore. There are a lot of more direct ways to get to individual agents and brokers who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, frankly. And so talk about a way to just simplify and remove, just a huge source of cost and wasted resources. Frankly, we would do away with those tomorrow, would be our wish.
So appointments generate a lot of revenue. So that, how are these guys and gals going to go tell their commissioner that, is industry willing to work on that issue with regulators? Wes, what's on the top of your wish list?
So I think it's equally unlikely as it might be that we would eliminate appointments anytime soon.
Wishing. This is the wishing part.
It's a wish list. So I would get at the duplicative layers of licensure. So what do we require for a person to sell, solicit, negotiate insurance? So the individual has to be licensed. The business entity that they work for has to be licensed in most states. the insurance department required them to go to a separate state agency and register as a foreign corporation. It's super expensive. And that's done to build, I guess, accountability, and we want to make sure there are no gaps, but it's like we don't trust it, because then on top of that, we require that business entity to also have a designated responsible producer. So we've got like 4 layers of licensure in essence to make sure that everybody's accountable. It just seems a little excessive. I'm not saying exactly what layer we would cut, but again, going back to what I was saying about streamlining DRLP requirements, I think there are some ways that we could potentially find efficiencies. And the reason why I would suggest that is this is extremely expensive for agencies. And it's not just the big agencies that feel the input. I mean, I think one thing I want to convey is, if you're like a big mega broker, you've got this down. It's easy for you to relatively manage the licensing process. If you're a small Main Street agency who has like a specialty program who still has to be licensed in 50 states, that's the one. I mean, they are spending a significant percentage of revenue, way higher than Marsh, on licensing compliance. So these dollars and cents are particularly meaningful and expensive for them. So if we can start to take some of those costs out of the system, it would be great.
Right. One story that I know of is a small to medium-sized brokerage that had to change its licensing because they changed their corporate structure. So they changed from being they changed to be like an LLC, from whatever. It was $250,000 in legal fees to do that. And so, we're not, that's pretty significant, for a relatively small business. John, what is your wish?
My wish is for Wes's wish and Kate's wish. And I was going to say what Kate said, so I really will double up on what Kate said.
Well, then make another wish.
The appointment's really important.
I think you're going to say 10 more wishes.
10 more wishes?
Exactly,
That
wish
would
for
be
10
good,
more
too.
wishes.
I think we need more than 10, though, because Karen has a long list. But then I was going to say NARAB, but that's not your job. It's something that we've been working on for a decade. Now.
It's going to be my number 2, so you can have that one.
Okay, so I'll take NARAB.
So real quick, for the new folks in the room, and the National Association of Registered Agents and Brokers is a piece of legislation that was passed by the United States Congress and signed by the President of the United States in 2015. It was to be implemented within 6 months to set a uniform standard for non-resident licensure in the United States. We're still waiting for that law to be implemented.
It was 3 presidents ago.
Yeah.
So NARAB would be great to get done, but obviously that's not the NAIC or the state insurance regulators. You guys have done all you can, I think, on that. But the 2 issues that Wes and Kate brought up, though, are important, and I think that what they show is like some reform or adjustment of these areas. It's going to need to happen because the market is evolving, right? And I think that we need to keep in mind the market evolution and how things are distributed and who's distributing and all the information that you already have available. So if you look at the full picture, except for the money for the appointments, we'll figure that out. But if you look at the full picture, there's a lot there that you already have where we can get rid of this friction. And these 2 issues that these guys have raised would get rid of a lot of that friction and some of that unnecessary cost, and you already have the information. We just have to figure out where it is now and how you can get it easily, and that can happen, but it's going to take work.
All right, we have a little bit of time for questions, comments, pushback, criticisms. Let's mix it up, folks.
Hello. Hey, I'm Greg from Mississippi Insurance Department, and I just have one question that's been bothering me for 20 years. Is there a way the NIPR could ever come up with a uniform form for every state to use when people move from one state to another?
The National Insurance Producer Registry is not a regulator. So I recommend that you go to your insurance commissioner and tell them that you want to make that a top priority. And the producer licensing task force will get right on that.
It's just a suggestion. I mean, we take calls every day.
Again,
Every day.
it is a huge issue. Obviously, especially since COVID, the level of moving from state to state has just, been enormous. So again, sort of like that, changing from LLC to LLP, it's the same kind of thing. And it really does impact people. It's economically significant. And so we'll put that on the list.
We need to quit making people cancel their license to move. That's just outdated,
I associate myself with that.
Yeah. Who else? Any questions from our virtual attendees? No, okay, thank you.
I'll just on that. That's I think a perfect example of an issue that could be tackled. It shouldn't be. I mean, if we're truly reciprocal states, that's what the foundation you would need to make that fairly instantaneous. So I mean, if we are really adhering to what's already in the PLMA, that should be low hanging fruit. We just got to make it an area of emphasis and perhaps try to tackle it in the next year.
I just want to make a comment, and it's more of a comment than anything, but in the 10 years, 11 legislative sessions that I've been through with this, it's just become harder and harder, and I think that's uniform. I think that's happened in all states.
Yeah.
It isn't just my state, but it's become harder and harder to get things passed and through legislatures. And so just really difficult. And the other comments that I heard too that I think are important is to try to narrow this down to 2 or 3 good that Wes talked about. Narrow this down to 2 or 3 good ideas, and try to push those ideas to the top and prioritize a few things, because I think to get people together. The other thing I heard too was you can't get everybody. You can't get everybody in one spot. Mm-hmm. So try to prioritize 2 or 3. Wish list things that aren't wish list things, but things that may be able to be accomplished, right. Through through reg or policy or what have you, yeah. And may not necessarily have to be legislative, right. Because it's gotten almost impossible to pass things legislatively. And, we've always done cleanup bills, Kate. But even cleanup bills in crazy legislatures can turn into something else. So yeah. We're not even fond of bringing those anymore, because they'll amend your cleanup bill and change the topic and turn it into some pet project that they want to work on.
Eliminate the UCC.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, that's no kidding. I mean, obviously that's the reality that we're sort of all living in right now. I mean, I make the point about NIPR, and I don't mean to be flip or dismissive, but we are not a regulator. We serve regulators. We serve the industry. We are to producer licensing what H&R Block is to tax. We stand between the regulated entities and the regulators, and we move information and transactions. But in doing that, we can collect information and we can provide feedback. And that's the commitment that we can make to you. For our regulators, you can talk to your account managers. If you're having these pain points in Mississippi, you're having pain points in some of these areas of friction in other states too. So let's start. We'll start capturing information and bring it back, and then we can start working through the NEIC and the committee process to try to elevate some of these issues. It's always a pleasure, folks, and to see old faces and plenty of new faces. And we look forward to this evening spending some more time with all of you and talking about producer licensing. Thank you all to our panel.